Welcome to the Fear and Greed Business Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. You can tell a lot about Australia by looking at demographics, at the trends affecting different social groups. It becomes particularly relevant to a business podcast when those changes and trends feed into the labour market, the workplace, and the broader economy. And right now, there's a fascinating story unfolding with young men in Australia that's being reflected in unemployment numbers and a steady closing of the gender pay gap. Demographer Simon Kuestenmacher is the co-founder of the Demographics Group. Simon, you're almost a regular on Fear and Greed. Welcome back this morning.
It's great to be back on.
Let's go through this. What's the big challenge facing young men in Australia? And I suppose who are young when we're talking about young men?
Exactly. So the young men cohort tends to be defined as kids being, or young people being 15 to 24. So 15 to 24, roughly the education stage of the life cycle still. Yeah. And with those young men, we try to measure what they're doing. And so you can just measure how many of those young men are in employment, have a job, how many of those young men are in education. But the real interesting numbers are hiding in the white space in between. Who is not in education and also at the same time not working? So who is just disengaged? And what's the story there? Are these just because there's plenty of reasons why you would not be engaged in neither education nor work. You could be caring for, your kids, for example, or for elderly people, or you might have a health condition, or you might be in prison, whatever it is. There are plenty of reasons, but increasingly it's neither of those issues. There is a quickly growing cohort of people that are just disengaged, who are not doing much at all, who are just living into the day, and they get by on very little money. And it's easy to get lost in a digital world, so to speak. And that has severe implications for men and women alike. And it has particularly implications for the richest and most educated women in Australia in a bizarre twist.
Okay, so before we get to the implications, why is it happening? It's happening more now than it did previously, I presume you're saying. Why do you think that? Is that an education thing? What's the background to it?
I think there's a story of lost hope. It's the idea that why would you leave the education system and not join the workforce? We have low unemployment. Jobs are available. All the other economic indicators would suggest that we see fewer people, fewer men in particular we call them NEETs, neither education, employment or training. So why is this cohort growing rather than shrinking under this scenario? And it's a mystery, so to speak. And I think we then need to open up all those bigger discussions about the meaning of life, about the broader purpose that you have. What gets you out of bed in the morning? What drives you? What is the meaning in your life? And for example, there's quite a bit of religious narratives. If you just think about, the Protestant work ethic that really pushed you to work, there is the idea that education is absolutely crucial, and lots of people proactively push their kids into education, but some don't, and some people get left behind. And it's very hard once you're in a bit of a rut to get the motivation to get out of this, because it's so easy to be sucked into alternative, waves of procrastination. We all experience this on a daily basis when we know we have certain kind of work tasks to do, and then you just shake yourself and go like, wait a second, did I just waste half an hour on stupid YouTube shorts or LinkedIn stuff that is not relevant at all at the moment? And you just blow this up a bit more, and then you have people, and it's particularly men, because what happened over the last 4 decades is that we saw ever more young men who are neither in education, employment or training, and we saw fewer and fewer women. And we're now at this point in time, for the first time, where we have more young men who are disengaged than young women. And young women traditionally, of course, 15 to 24, you were a mom. You looked after your kids. You were certainly busy. You were not disengaged. You were just disengaged from those sectors. You were most certainly busy. But now lots and lots of advances in gender equality, in access to employment and work opportunities for women. So it's easy storytelling why the cohort, and we push for childbirth out into the late 20s, really mid 30s these days. So it makes sense that women are not disengaged.
Stay with me, Simon, and we'll be back in a minute. My guest this morning is demographer Simon Kuestenmacher, co-founder of the Demographics Group. So we have this cohort of NEETs, young men. What does it, so for whatever reason, what's it mean then going for, what are the ramifications of the growth in this group?
Yeah, well, for them, it is very difficult because their future prosperity is absolutely hampered. You're missing out on knowledge and earning capacity in your early years, and they then trickle down throughout your whole life cycle. That has severe implications for your partnering prospects, because one of the big social trends that has not changed over the last decades is what sociologists call upward social mobility of women. This is a reference back to times when women were completely locked out of the workforce, and the only way to improve your social standing was to marry upwards, to marry someone who is richer and more educated than your family was. And that desire of women to partner up with men who are at the very least as educated and have earned that much money as they do, that hasn't gone away. We know this from online dating profiles. There's plenty of data that says that overwhelmingly women want partners that are on their level or higher. And now that women are outperforming men on every level of education, we're seeing this becoming a problem. Because in a sense, there are men, uneducated, disengaged men at the bottom, and highly educated, super successful women at the top, who are both the two groups who find it particularly hard to find partners because their potential pool of partners keeps shrinking. So if a successful career woman in her 40s says there are no good men around, she's technically speaking right.
Yeah, right.
Imagine the kind of partner that she would need. There are not that many men like this around. And so I'm not, to be honest, not too concerned about those highly educated, successful women. They then just focus more on their careers, produce more GDP, spend more money. That's fine on a societal level. That is not a major structural issue. But young, disengaged, disappointed men, that has always been the recipe for lots and lots of social disruptions. These are people, men that vote for parties on the political extreme. That's not helpful for social cohesion. They're angry, they're disengaged, and now they're also not able to partner up. That is not good. And so we see at the worst end of the spectrum, then you have the Andrew Tates of the world really reeling in with misogynist, anti-women narratives, the incel movement. There is lots and lots of negative stuff that comes out of this.
So now I was going to say, it is very negative. There are some, you've talked about the gender pay gap lessening, and partly a result of this, we want the gender pay gap to close, though whether this is the way we want it to close, I'm not sure whether that's quite the answer. What can we do about it? So it's really interesting what you're saying. I've never ever thought of this. I personally, Jackie and I have 6 boys between the ages of 26 and 18. I'm now going to rethink what they're doing with their lives, right? Because it is really scary for parents and for the individuals. What can we do about it?
Well, we always want to think about the preventative things first. So what can we do in the education system? There is plenty of research suggesting that the education system as a whole, as a system, works better for girls than it does for boys. We are rewarding behavior that requires a certain kind of social intelligence, which women establish much sooner in life. Men establish this later in life, a different kind of intelligence. And it's the idea of sitting still, of listening, of adhering to rules, particularly in young kids. Girls are much better at it. And so the school system as it is now is favoring the skills that these young girls are better in, and boys lag behind. So what you can do as the parent of a young boy in particular is to hold him back from education for as long as you can. Meaning keep them in kindergarten for an additional year. And depending on when your kid is born, that is actually not an option. But if your kid is born just, the right corner of the year, you can just hold it back a bit. And then your boy is one of the older kids in school rather than one of the younger. So in your class, aim for your boys to be rather older than younger. That would be a quick fix that you can do as a parent. What we're then also seeing is, of course, the need on a societal level to create charter schools that are particularly focusing on these disengaged young people. And again, so there are also disengaged young women. It's just that it's much more likely for men to be disengaged this way. So this wouldn't be just a male thing. And I also really don't want this discussion to be viewed as a zero-sum game. The goal of education and the goal of society must always be to allow everyone to operate at their highest potential and to give them as much freedom and choice in their career and education as possible. Yep. And so when we say we want to fix the education system for boys, we want to lift those boys up rather than push the girls down, if that makes sense. Yeah. So that's the big risk in this discussion. Let's avoid that.
Fascinating. Simon, thank you for talking to Fear and Greed.
An absolute pleasure.
That was Simon Kuestenmacher, co-founder of the Demographics Group. This is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, daily business news for people who make their own decisions. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.